Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be focusing on something pretty crucial, and that's how people try to convince each other, especially when everything's on the line, when the stakes are super high.
Exactly.
And to really get into this, we're going to be looking at a key moment, a turning point, you could say, in Shakespeare's play, The Tragedy of Julius Caesar. Specifically, what's happening in Act 2 leading up to the big event.
Right.
Because, well, that's what our listeners focusing on for their assignment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This deep dive is kind of tailored for our listener out there who's a 10th grader and who's getting ready to tackle Julius Caesar. You'll be looking at Brutus's big speech later on, where he's trying to explain, well, everything that happened.
Trying to justify himself.
Exactly. So what we want to do today is give you a really strong understanding of persuasive language. How do people use words to get others to think or do something? We call this rhetorical appeals.
Rhetorical appeals.
And we're going to examine this first by looking at how it works in a more modern story, something that might feel a bit more familiar, before we see how Shakespeare uses it.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
So we've got some pretty interesting material lined up for this.
Yeah.
We're going to be comparing, or sort of looking at, how this all plays out in both the play and a gripping modern story. A story about a cartel, actually.
A cartel, yeah.
Called Romano Cartel, Dangerous Ambitions, Part 2.
Very dramatic.
Very dramatic, yes. And we'll be focusing on this critical interaction between two key players, Cassius and Caesar.
Right before everything blows up.
Right before everything goes down. And the interesting thing is that in both the play, kind of setting the stage for what you'll read later, and this cartel story, you have betrayal.
Betrayal.
Big time.
Yeah.
And these characters are really trying hard to justify what they're about to do or what's about to happen.
Like their actions have to make sense somehow.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be exploring. The mission of this deep dive, I guess you could say, is to give you a really clear grasp of these rhetorical appeals. There are three main ones: ethos, pathos, and logos.
Right.
Big words, but we're going to see them in action in this cartel story.
Yeah, think of it like this. You're getting a hands-on experience with these tools of persuasion, like in a setting that you might find more relatable, right? Before you jump into the world of Shakespeare.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. Let's get into this Romano Cartel, Dangerous Ambitions Part 2 story. You can really feel the tension building up as we get closer to this pivotal moment between Cassius and Caesar.
Totally.
Can you set the stage for us a little bit? What's going on right before they have this exchange?
Yeah, definitely. The story creates this super ominous atmosphere, right? Caesar, who's like the head honcho of this cartel, is heading to this meeting.
At an abandoned luxury hotel.
Yeah, right. An abandoned luxury hotel. Already, that's a bit creepy, right?
Yeah.
Like, why there? And this kind of like foreshadows all the secrecy and danger that's going down. And just before he leaves, his wife, Calpurnia.
Oh, Calpurnia.
She's having these like really intense premonitions.
Bad vibes.
Bad vibes, yeah. And she's practically begging him not to go. It's like really similar to the warnings and bad omens you'll see in Shakespeare later.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then you have this guy, Artemidorus, who's desperately trying to warn Caesar that something's up. He's sending all these cryptic messages and even leaves him a voice note.
But they're all intercepted, right?
Intercepted, yeah. Someone's making sure Caesar stays in the dark. So he's walking right into this trap.
Totally oblivious.
Totally oblivious. Surrounded by people who seem all cool and collected but are actually plotting against him. Yeah. It's like, it's a classic setup.
A betrayal waiting to happen.
Exactly.
So we get to this crucial point. Cassius confronts Caesar. He says, "We've all made sacrifices to build this empire. But you've stopped listening, Caesar. You rule alone."
Powerful words.
Yeah. Let's break that down. What kind of rhetorical appeals are at play here? What's Cassius doing with these words?
So what's really fascinating here is how Cassius tries to blend these different persuasive techniques together, right? He doesn't just stick to one.
He's got a whole arsenal.
Right. So he starts with, "We've all made sacrifices to build this empire." He's immediately trying to establish this sense of like shared experience, shared hardship, like they're all in this together. It's a direct reference to their past.
Their history.
Their history, yeah. And it suggests that all of them were vital in creating their current power.
So this is ethos, right? Appealing to credibility, shared experience.
That's exactly it. It's ethos. He's reminding Caesar, hey, we were partners in this, not just, your lackeys.
Right. Like we were there with you, Caesar. We built this together.
Precisely. And you could even argue there's some pathos mixed in there as well.
Pathos, the emotional appeal.
Yeah, yeah. By mentioning sacrifices, he might be trying to stir up some feelings of unfairness in Caesar. Or maybe even in the other conspirators who are listening in.
Like a sense of betrayal, maybe.
Right. It subtly implies, like, hey, we gave so much and now you're acting like it means nothing. It's playing on that sense of betrayal of their shared past. This is a good thing to remember. Appealing to shared history, like Cassius does, can be a powerful way to make someone feel obligated or, highlight a perceived injustice. Like, you owe us, Caesar.
Right, right. So it's not just about facts. He's also tapping into emotions, shared identity, all that.
Only.
Okay, what about the second part? But you stopped listening, Caesar. You rule alone. What's going on there?
This part seems to lean more towards logos, like the appeal to logic.
Okay,
Cassius is pointing to what he's presenting as a big flaw in Caesar's leadership.
so he's going for the logical approach.
Right. By saying Caesar's stopped listening and rules alone, he's basically implying that Caesar's not making good decisions anymore, that he's become isolated, maybe even irrational in how he's running things.
Like he's lost his way.
Yeah, like he's lost touch. And it's a way of saying, hey, this path you're on, it's not good, it's not sustainable, it's hurting the empire.
Right, right. So it sounds like a logical argument, like, Caesar, your leadership's become a problem. It's damaging. But could there also be an emotional element here?
Oh, absolutely. It can work on an emotional level, too. This could be playing into Caesar's fears, like his fear of being alone, isolated, or even his ego.
No leader wants to be seen as out of touch.
Exactly. No one wants to be thought of as the guy who ignores everyone's advice. This statement could make Caesar question himself, like, am I really a good leader? Do people actually respect me? It gets into his head. And this brings up an interesting question for you to think about. How often do leaders try to present their decisions as totally logical?
When there might be other reasons, emotional reasons behind them, it's like a smokescreen.
Totally.
So Cassius is coming at Caesar from all angles here.
He's going for it.
How does Caesar react to this?
Well, Caesar, he just kind of smirks and says, is that what this is? A complaint about feelings?
Smirks, huh? What does that tell us about how Caesar sees this whole attempt at persuasion?
That smirk is key. It tells you a lot. By dismissing Cassius's words as just like a whiny complaint about feelings.
He's belittling him.
Yeah, he's trying to make Cassius look weak and irrational. And by doing that, he's basically saying, I don't need to take you seriously.
It's a classic power move. You're being emotional, not logical, so I can just ignore you.
Exactly.
This connects directly to the kind of analysis you'll be doing for your assignment. You'll be looking for the most obvious persuasive technique being used, explaining how it targets the person's ego, logic, fears. Then you analyze how they react and then connect that to what the speaker really wants, their true intentions. So let's take this exchange from the story as an example. How would you approach that?
Okay, so let's break it down using that sentence frame you mentioned. Looking at what Cassius says, you could say pathos is the strongest appeal, focusing on the sacrifices part and how he implies that they're being ignored. And this could be aimed at Caesar's ego. Like if Caesar thinks he's the only reason their empire is successful.
He'd be offended.
Right. Or it could play on his fear of disloyalty among his people. On the other hand, you could say logos is more prominent, especially with the you've stopped listening, you rule alone part. It makes Caesar question his logic, suggests he's not making good decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. And then how would you explain why that particular appeal might target Caesar's ego, logic, or fears in this specific context?
That's where you have to really think about how Caesar's portrayed in the story, right? Think about his personality.
His power, his confidence.
Yeah, maybe even his arrogance. Remember earlier when he says, no one dares move against me?
Oh, yeah.
That tells you a lot. So bringing up sacrifices could totally bruise his ego if he thinks he's the only reason they've succeeded. And being accused of not listening, that challenges his whole idea of himself as this wise, effective leader. And then there's that ruling alone bit.
That could hit a nerve.
It could, definitely. It might tap into his fear of being vulnerable, even though he acts all tough and untouchable.
Right. It's all about understanding who the speaker is trying to persuade.
Exactly.
Okay. So then the sentence frame asks about Caesar's reaction, that smirk. Does that mean Cassius's attempt at persuasion worked?
That smirk is basically saying, nope, not buying it. He's not persuaded at all, not in the way Cassius probably hoped. Instead of showing any sign of, agreement or taking a moment to reflect, Caesar just brushes it off. It's like Cassius tried to appeal to their shared past or to Caesar's logic, but it didn't work.
It bounced right off.
Bounced right off. Caesar just saw it as an emotional outburst.
It shows the power dynamic between them for sure.
For sure.
Caesar's in control here.
He's the one holding all the cards.
Okay, last part of the sentence frame. What does this moment tell us about what Cassius is really trying to do? What are his true intentions?
Well, considering how Caesar just shuts him down, you could say that Cassius wasn't actually trying to have an honest conversation with him.
Not a real heart-to-heart?
Not at all. It's more like he's setting up a justification for what they're about to do.
The betrayal.
The betrayal. He's building this narrative that Caesar's become this out-of-touch, power-hungry ruler who doesn't care about anyone's contributions anymore.
So he deserves what's coming.
Right. It's not about genuinely convincing Caesar of anything. It's about making their actions seem justified, both to themselves and maybe to others later.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's less about changing Caesar's mind and more about, like, making their actions seem, I don't know, less bad.
Exactly. It's all about framing.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the tragedy of Julius Caesar. How can understanding this whole dynamic between Cassius and Caesar in the story help our listener understand what's happening in Shakespeare, specifically in Act Two?
This is where things get really interesting. Okay, so we don't see this exact moment where Cassius confronts Caesar with these kinds of arguments right before the assassination in Act 2.
Not word for word.
Right. That happens a bit later in the play. But the planning is definitely going on in Act 2.
The wheels are turning.
Yeah. But the key thing here is that the intent behind what Cassius is doing is basically the same in both the play and the short story.
It's all about manipulation.
Exactly. In Julius Caesar, Cassius is like a master manipulator, right? He's working behind the scenes, trying to turn Brutus and the others against Caesar, and he uses these rhetorical appeals all the time.
It's his weapon of choice.
Totally. He plays on their fears, like, what if Caesar becomes a tyrant? He appeals to their sense of Roman pride and honor, their ethos. And he tries to make it seem like getting rid of Caesar is the only logical choice. For the good of Rome. That's logos.
Okay, so even though the specific words and the situation are different, the listener should still be looking for these same persuasive techniques when they read Act 2 of Julius Caesar.
Exactly. You'll see the conspirators, including Cassius, talking about how they're worried about Caesar's power and how dangerous he might be for Rome. Just like Cassius in the story tries to paint Caesar as this isolated, uncaring leader, the conspirators in the play do the same thing.
They're trying to make him look bad.
Yeah. They're trying to justify what they're planning to do. They use language that's meant to stir up emotions, pathos. They talk about how they're honorable Romans, which is appealing to ethos, at least from their point of view. And they try to present this logical argument that they have to get rid of Caesar for the good of Rome.
That's logos.
Right. So even though the stories are different, the intent behind the persuasion is the same. Whether it's a modern cartel or ancient Rome, people trying to justify doing something huge, even violent.
They use the same tactics.
Exactly. And just like Caesar in the story has his own beliefs and reactions that shape how he sees Cassius's words, the characters in Julius Caesar, including Caesar himself, also have their own perspectives that influence how they respond to these appeals.
They're not just blank slates.
No way. Think about Calpurnia and her dreams and the soothsayer's warnings in Act 2. They're trying to get Caesar to stay home by appealing to his fear.
That's pathos.
Exactly. And then you have Brutus struggling with what to do. Cassius is feeding him all these arguments about Caesar's ambition, but Brutus also values honor and friendship. That's a conflict between ethos and logos.
Like a battle inside his head.
Totally. And being able to spot these appeals in action will help you understand why the characters do what they do and why the whole thing ends in tragedy.
It's like having a decoder ring for the play.
I like that analogy.
So for our listener out there getting ready to tackle Act 2, what's the most important thing to remember?
Be on the lookout for those rhetorical appeals. Ethos, pathos, and logos. Pay attention to what the characters are saying, but also how they're saying it and why they might be choosing those specific words at that moment.
It's like detective work.
It is. Ask yourself, are they trying to build trust, establish their authority? Are they playing on emotions like fear, loyalty, resentment? Are they trying to present a logical argument, even if it seems flawed?
Right. Recognizing those tactics will really help you understand the play on a deeper level. And as we saw with the Cartel story, these analytical skills are useful everywhere, not just in Shakespeare.
Absolutely. Being able to spot these persuasive techniques makes you a more critical reader and listener, which is important no matter what you're reading or who you're listening to.
So as you dive into Act 2 of the tragedy of Julius Caesar, keep those eyes peeled for those moments where characters are trying to convince each other of something.
And think about which appeals they're using and why.
Exactly. And as you're reading, here's something else to consider. Think about how understanding these persuasive techniques can help you in your own life.
Mm.
Like when you're trying to convince someone of something.
Or when someone's trying to convince you.
Right. Are the strategies all that different from what we see in these stories about power and betrayal?
Good question. Something to think about.
Definitely. And on that note, well, that's a wrap for this deep dive. We hope this has given you some useful tools for understanding rhetorical appeals and how they work in both classic literature and modern storytelling, especially as you get ready to analyze Act Two of Julius Caesar.
Yeah. And, in future deep dives, we could definitely take a closer look at Brutus's speech in Act 3 or even go deeper into specific persuasive techniques.
Oh, yeah, that'd be interesting.
Definitely.
But until then, happy reading and good luck with your analysis.
Happy analyzing.
See you next